In Perspective, episode 117.
Hi, everybody. Welcome once again to In Perspective. I am Bob Branco. I'm very pleased, as always, to have with me my good friend and co-host, Al Hensel. How you doing today, Al?
Doing very well, Bob. I hope you and all of our listeners are as well.
Thank you very much. We certainly are. And before we continue, I just want to thank those people who make it possible to air our program, which includes 195 The Globe. Thank you very much, Dennis Sumlin, for making sure that we're aired every Monday evening at 9 p.m. on the talk side of 195 The Globe. Also, Jacqueline Sylvia from JS Web Solutions, the lady behind the archiving of our shows on our website, which is www.brancoevents.com. Just click on that arrow down until you see Branco Events Podcasts. Click on that as well, and you will find our archived shows from latest to earliest.
Merci, Jacqueline.
Today we're going to be talking about disability rights and advocacy and the ADA and all that goes with it in this country. And our guest has been doing a lot of things in that regard for a long time. She was at one point the commissioner of the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind. Then she ended up working in former President Barack Obama's cabinet. And she's going to talk about that a little bit already. And without further ado, let me introduce Janet Labreck. Janet, great to have you on In Perspective today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on the program.
Well, I figured where a lot of people are questioning a lot of the laws, and while other people are happy with what's going on in regards to disability rights, I thought I would get your perspective on everything because you have a vast knowledge of what's going on. But before we get into all that, I would like to ask several questions just to catch everybody up on what you're doing. You did serve as commissioner for the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind for several years. Before that, you were a counselor. And before we got on the air, you started to tell us a story about one of the first things that you got involved with as a client advocate for MCB. Tell us about that.
Sure. I was actually a consumer, just like everyone else who was a consumer of MCB, and I was in the process of applying to go to college, and I have a degenerative eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa, and part of the issues that come along with retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, is that you are very light sensitive or photophobic, so you have a great deal of sensitivity to light. And so there was, at the time, the company Corning put out a new pair of glasses, sunglasses, that were designed to really filter out the ultraviolet through the lenses of the glasses. And that was significant for me because it meant that I would have less glare and less headaches that typically accompany some of the condition itself. And so I wanted to try these glasses, and I did, and they filtered out exactly what they said. They filtered out the ultraviolet. It gave me much more visual clarity from the lens itself and less visual strain. And so I was very excited about the glasses and approached my previous counselor and said that I would really like to have the commission help me with those glasses, to purchase those glasses, because during the time I was an SSI recipient and I did not have $300 to actually purchase those glasses, and requested some financial support for purchasing the glasses. And I was denied the glasses. And I wasn't sure about what basis the denial was happening on, but at one point they said to me that they didn't know anything about the glasses, and they were very trendy, and they weren't in the habit of paying for trendy glasses. And I said, well, it's a medical issue. What are you basing your decision on? Just on that, not any knowledge about the glasses. So I requested an appeals process and went back and prepared, my portion of what I was going to say as part of my appeals process. I did my homework about the glasses themselves and what they actually would do, and won my appeal. And they asked me, well, what are you looking for compensation? And I said, no, I'm actually looking for the agency to change their policy. You should have a stronger consumer-centered policy, not based on making decisions on a product that you don't have an understanding of, and that your policy should be clear. And so they changed their policy. And as I was leaving the building, someone was running behind me and asked me if I wanted a job for the agency. And I said, I'm not sure I want to work for this agency. What is the job? And they said, it's a client advocate. And I wasn't sure about what a client advocate was or does. And they explained it to me. And then I thought about it for a moment, and I said, well, wait a minute here. I'm not employed. I need a job. I'm going to be going to college, so I need to support myself. But it was a part-time job. And I said, well, it'll help me get my feet wet. So, yes, I'll take the job. And that's how I started my career at the Mass Commission for the Blind as a client advocate.
So what you're telling us is that as a consumer, you influenced the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind as a consumer before you were even on their staff.
Yeah, with regard to policies, and practices that agencies have, that consumers often think, just because a counselor says no, that it means no, and that you do not have any other recourse, and that's just not the case. That you do have recourse, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So then you became a counselor in Central Massachusetts, I believe. Was it Region 2?
I became an independent living counselor initially after I became a client advocate. And so I worked out in Region 1, which is Springfield and going west towards the Berkshires. So I covered a very large territory. And I was an independent living case coordinator working with individuals who are all blind or visually impaired, who also had secondary disabilities, and they needed more significant interventions around services, home modifications. And so I worked a lot with contractors for those individuals who may have needed bathroom modifications or ramps. So I learned a lot about home modifications and learned a lot about doing state contracts with contractors. And then I worked as a vocational rehabilitation counselor after I got my master's degree in rehabilitation counseling. And then from there, I had applied for a regional director's position in the Region 2 office, which is the Worcester office. And I was appointed that position to head up that Worcester office. And at the same time, I was also doing some adjunct professor teaching with Assumption College in the evenings. I would teach undergraduate as well as graduate students who were pursuing their degrees in the field of rehabilitation. And then from there, I was appointed in 2007 by Governor Patrick as the commissioner for the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind. And I was there for 6 years in that role as commissioner. And then in 2013, I was recruited by the Obama administration to serve as the commissioner for the Rehabilitation Services Administration in Washington, D.C., overseeing all of the vocational rehabilitation programs nationally.
Okay. I'm going to ask any caller on the line to please mute your phone by hitting *1. Please do it now. So I remember when you worked for President Obama after you left the commission, Janet, and I said to myself, what's going to happen when President Obama leaves office? Because whether he ran for 1 term or 2 terms, he was going to leave office eventually. And usually follow-up presidents don't keep the cabinet members of previous presidents. And I thought about you then. I said, I hope when Janet leaves that job, she finds something else. Now, you mentioned that you have a couple of businesses. You told us this before the program began. So if you can elaborate on what you do now and what those opportunities are all about for you.
Sure. The work that I did for the Obama administration, as well as the work that I have done throughout my career with the Commission for the Blind, really coincided very nicely. It's the work that I've been the most passionate about, working to change policies, regulations, promulgate national regulations for the vocational rehabilitation program. It really is something that I felt very strongly about and something that I really wanted to be able to continue once my tenure as Commissioner for the Rehabilitation Services Administration ended with the ending of the Obama administration in 2017. So the administration was extremely supportive of all political appointees, and we have our own network. We continue to have our own network, and we really did support each other and help each other. So many of the appointees think about leveraging the national skills that we acquired and the networking that we were able to do as national leaders and go into consulting, or they are recruited by large companies. It just depends on what your area of interest, is. And while I certainly had numerous offers, I really wanted to stay committed to the disability community and the work that I did, and decided that I wanted to formulate my own company. So I started by formulating Janet and Labreck Consulting LLC and continuing to do national presentations for corporations as well as for private nonprofit organizations and for-profit corporations around the country. Since my name was obviously known from the work that I did, so I still had lots of opportunity to continue to build on those skill sets. And so that's what I did with Janet Labreck Consulting. And then I also wanted to expand on that work because there's a lot of work to be done, as you know, and there's a lot of opportunity out there. And so I decided to formulate another consulting company called Synergy Consulting Partners. But I needed help because it's a lot of work and it's very challenging for me to be all around the country, but also be doing other work that people requested. So I have now two partners with me who are as part of the company as well, and we partner together with various organizations and agencies and all across the country to provide services to those agencies.
You said Synergy Consulting Partnerships?
Synergy, yes.
Synergy.
SYNERGY consultingpartners.org is the site.
So what does Synergy do?
We work with both state agencies as well as private nonprofit organizations, colleges, and universities, and we really help to position the agencies for change. So we provide consultative services to them if they're having specific issues, for example, around their finance. One of my partners is an expert and is a CPA and has done major work in the finance industry. And so if they're having issues as an organization, with managing their finances or looking for better ways to leverage their financing, if they're receiving state and federal financing, if they're working under the current legislation under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, state agencies have specific mandates that they're supposed to be following and providing services to individuals in the disability community. We can come in and do assessments for them. If their organization is in the midst of any kind of structural changes that really may potentially compromise their ability to continue to serve the individual disability communities, that they have funding to serve those individuals, we will come in and do assessments if they're having issues or concerns around doing specific initiatives that they may be trying to implement. If they're having challenges with it, we help them with identifying those types of initiatives and help them with putting in specific measures for being able to implement those initiatives with the disability community.
Al?
So, Janet, I guess I have two questions, and I'll work chronologically in reverse. So my first question is, could you summarize the differences between Janet L. Labreck LLC and Synergy, and whether or not the former is still active?
They're both still active, and
Okay.
what Janet L. Labreck Consulting, when I initially left the Obama administration, I primarily used Janet L. Labreck Consulting. So, for example, when national corporations or national insurance industries want to engage me to come and do a presentation for a national conference, or when other organizations need a motivational type speaker or
Okay.
speaker that wants to hear, success stories or content-specific
I get it. Yep.
information about their industry. I do that through Janet L. Labreck Consulting.
Okay. Yep.
I also do some of that with
Synergy.
Synergy Consulting partners.
Sure.
We get more involved with specific goals and objectives, organizational issues that the organizations have that we need to be in there much longer term.
So the first is, if I may, more centered around motivational, inspirational success, whereas the latter is more around structure, root structure.
Exactly.
Okay.
Organizational structure, agencies that want to change how they're doing business, or organizations
Sure.
that are having issues with implementation under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It's more content specific, and it's also involving longer term engagement. So
Excellent.
we're in their agencies or organizations anywhere from, a couple of weeks to 6 months to a year, sometimes 2 years, depending on what the issues are.
Got it. And I assume that Bob's going to cover how you relate to, through and with ADA as well down the road. But so my first question, actually, way back, Janet, in our discourse here, involves the policy change that you were able to make as a burgeoning college student transitional from high school to college. And I mean, things like that really get me passionate, because what it sounds like you did, and if those who may have not remembered back at the beginning of our interview, Janet had mentioned that by bringing to policymakers' attention in the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind in terms of the way they go about approving or funding specific products, she literally got them to have a sea change in the way they go about determining or evaluating whether a product is viable enough for them to fund, and by way of actually some people doing something called their homework. Instead of just saying, no, we've never done this before, so therefore we're not going to take the first step and blaze a trail with this one. We're just going to say no because we've never done it before. And Janet naturally changed that. Janet, after you did that, after you had won your appeal, did they actually go in and change the way they look at new products, new technology from that point forward?
Yes.
Good.
And this is where I would, say to any consumer being served, not only by this agency, but any agency, just because something is written in policy does not mean that it arbitrarily applies to every single situation or
Right.
every individual consumer that's being served by that agency. So under the Rehab Act, requires that agencies who are receiving federal resources as well as state resources to operate a vocational rehabilitation program, that it is first and foremost a individualized, customized program. Individual consumers being able to receive those services from the agency. So you first have to obviously present as a person with a documented disability. You need to be able to demonstrate that you can benefit from the services and supports being provided by that agency, and that you need to be able to have a clear, concise vocational goal, whether that's to go to college or to say that you want to secure employment. And along the way, you need certain supports, and those supports range anything from assistive technology. If you're in a general VR agency that's not serving individuals who are blind or visually impaired, it might mean that you need supports around helping to learn how to drive a modified van vehicle, or you might need help with, helping to secure specific types of support that are going to help you to become independent. And so the rules and regulations require that the agencies provide those supports. They can certainly have internal rules and regulations around how the funds are allocated and what constitutes the ability for the agency to say yes or to say no, but it needs to be supported and reinforced by policies that exist in the agency. And so when that doesn't happen, and you just say no because you're just saying no, then it's not supported by policies that are clearly documented and clearly available to consumers to access, then, consumers need to challenge that. And that's what I did.
And Janet, this took place back, 78, 79, 80-ish?
Yeah, I started going to college in 1980, so
Okay.
It was somewhere around. And I actually, I started going to college in 1980, and I graduated from college in 1984, and it was somewhere around that time period because I started as a commissioned civil blind in 1985. So it was just prior to that in my role as blind advocate, just prior to 1985.
Okay, so Janet, briefly I want to touch on the ADA, then we have a couple of calls that may want to talk to you. But before we get to the calls, President Bush Sr. signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law in July of 1990. A lot of people like this law. A lot of people don't like the law. As a matter of fact, some people who don't like the law would rather have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Frankly, I don't know enough to know why. I guess each law is different. But I guess my biggest concern about the ADA is, are all of the parts of it enforced enough? And this is where I think you may come in, because I'm sure you've dealt with this issue many, many times in your capacity as MCB commissioner and as a member of President Obama's cabinet, and maybe in other aspects of life too.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is we're about to approach the 30th anniversary of the ADA in 2020. And, it's interesting because back in 1990, when that act was signed into law, I didn't know much about federal legislation or anything like that, but I knew something major was happening, and I knew that I wanted to be able to understand what was happening, and I knew that a lot of people were going to be going to Washington, D.C., and that this really was going to change the trajectory of what this particular law meant for people with disabilities. And so I got on a plane and I went to D.C., and I wanted to be a part of just seeing what was happening and understanding, the significance of it. And the signing of the ADA was taking place, and I got all the information and went there. I didn't get to be inside because it was so packed full of people with disabilities who came from every state you can imagine. It was just such a landmark, moment that everybody was there. But I got a chance to at least see the signing of it in person, and knew that it was really going to be important to the lives of individuals with disabilities. It is probably the most progressive piece of legislation law, and that certainly means here as well as internationally. I have had a chance to meet with many dignitaries from different countries who still to this day don't have this type of legislation signed into law in their respective country. And so it is still a very effective piece of legislation, but in no way means that it is a piece of legislation that continues, that there aren't still issues with it, both in the education system as well as both in public access. And certainly we all know as individuals who are blind and visually impaired know that there are still significant challenges and barriers that are presented in front of us all the time, particularly in the world of the internet, in terms of access to websites. We know that there continues to be significant barriers that face us. There are lots of lawsuits that are pending with regard to certain areas of the ADA. Certainly the internet is one, but also there's accommodations around access to airport. There's accommodation issues still remaining in the transportation industry in general. So with taxi services, people still have issues sometimes with Uber and other types of transportation services. So it's still in no way a piece of legislation that does not continue to face significant issues, with compliance around people making sure that they're doing the right thing, and that, the law was signed into effect in 1990. We're approaching 2020 here. So it's not a case that people don't know what they're supposed to be doing. It's really a case where enforcement continues to be the issue for the ADA.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have two calls. The first call I've already identified. Steve from Attleboro. You're on In Perspective with Janet Labreck.
Hi, Janet. I just want to say I really like your attitude about, self-advocacy, having a plan. The commission has done a lot for the blind, and Mass has done a lot for me in the past 5 years. They got me through the Carroll Center Project Search and Employable, which was basically an internship program between the employers at the Cambridge Health Alliance and the consumer, and it was, I think, educational for both sides. So my question becomes, now I work for the MBTA as a tester, so I'm really vested in the ADA as far as trying to enforce it. I know litigation is necessary, but I think there's going to be better ways to enforce it. But my real bottom line question is, what's your take on, because we talk about this all the time on the lines, why is the unemployment rate of the blind VI population still so high after all these years? I'm sure there's probably not one reason, but if you worked in the field so long, I just wanted to get your take on why it is still such an issue.
Well, I think there are multiple reasons why it's still an issue, and I think that the biggest one continues to be, related to attitudes about or misperceptions about individuals who are blind and visually impaired. And so access to information about that and experience for companies or employers, who aren't quite clear about what they can do and sometimes end up sitting out on the sidelines. But also I think one of the other primary issues is the fact that individuals who are blind or visually impaired or that have disabilities in general are still kind of on the sidelines and marginalized in terms of understanding what it is that we can do, what we bring to the table, what we bring to the nation's workforce, the skill sets that are necessary for us to acquire, and the partnerships and the relationships that are really important for there to be a successful match for individuals particularly who are blind or visually impaired. So individuals who are blind and visually impaired really need to be highly skilled, highly focused, motivated in order to get out there. But in addition to that, I think all of us know that we also also face additional barriers because sometimes individuals who are blind and visually impaired as well as who have other disabilities, have other health-related conditions, and they are forced to make a decision between, do I choose to go to work? Do I choose to stay on SSDI and lose the medical insurance that I have, that I need, for example? But also I think that, the legislation of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act changed how we look at who we are serving and when we are serving them from the perspective of our agency. So, they're now required to start working with individuals who are blind or visually impaired or have another disability much earlier than states have. Now, Massachusetts has always been pretty proactive and at the forefront of working with individuals beginning from birth, because particularly for those who are blind, because we had the advantage of having state funding from the Massachusetts state legislature that allowed for children's services or social workers through the Commission for the Blind to begin working at families right from the birth of their child, if their child is blind or visually impaired. So you get to them very early, and that's part of the problem. If you don't get to individuals who have a disability early on in life, and you don't provide a mechanism that allows for those skills and the training to begin as early as possible, then it's really challenging for people to think about coming out and acquiring those skills as well as the education that they need today to be marketable and employable. And so being forced to choose between whether or not you have health insurance and you can manage your health conditions, but also acquire the skill sets that you need, is something that has been an inherent barrier, both from the Social Security system as well as looking at, what kinds of messaging that we all get from our families early in life, in terms of you have a disability. What are the expectations that your family are installing on you from early in your life? Is the messaging that you're receiving saying, you know what, yes, you have this disability, but here's what we expect. We expect you to be able to continue to do the best that you can do. We expect you to go to college. We expect you to graduate high school. We expect you to get a job and do the best you can do. So a lot of it is involving expectations. A lot of it's involving our educational system, our workforce system, and what eligibility criteria we set in place for people. Are we really giving an opportunity, or are we putting so many barriers in front of people that they have no chance?
Well, I'll tell you, Janet, what really bothers me, and I've spoken with one or two people over the years about this, part of the problem, I think, I'm going to try to answer Steve's question a little bit. I'm not sure this is the entire answer, but I'm going to give it a shot. I actually know people who will tell me and you and everybody else, they get a job offer and they'll say, I really don't want this job because I'm afraid I'm going to lose all of my SSI. So they don't take the job. So they're still part of the statistic as a result. I think that's sad. There's got to be more of an incentive for some of these blind people to go to work without them worrying about losing a federal subsidy.
Right. Yeah, and that goes back to expectations. Now, I've talked to people internationally and other countries where there is no system like we have in terms of Social Security, SSDI, or SSI. So if you have a disability, the expectation is that, you either acquire the skills or you're being, certainly either on the street and you have no resources available to you to live. And so our system, I think that it's necessary to a certain extent for some people to be able to have it until they can get the skill sets and the job training that they need. But then you need to look at, first of all, nobody that I know who has ever been on SSI, and that includes myself, or SSDI, either benefit, has ever gotten wealthy off of living on SSI or SSDI. It is much more likely today that many individuals who are on SSI or SSDI benefits are living at or below the poverty level. Because because you can't possibly be economically self-sufficient on the resources that you're receiving on SSI or SSDI benefits.
Okay. Steve, do you have any more questions?
I think that sums it up. I just think that I guess I didn't really address it, but I think a lot of people, like Bob was kind of alluding to, is that some people just throw in the towel, and it's like, well, the commission won't do anything for me, and why bother? And I don't know what the numbers are, but I see a lot of that as well. And then you get people who say, well, I did this, so you should be able to do it, but they don't give you, they just like, this is my success story, which is great. They motivated me, but it seems like we almost have to have a grassroots movement, because a lot of people, it's almost like, I see it as like the successful people, blind VI, and those who, for whatever reason, either circumstances or they just didn't want to try. So I don't want to see us fighting amongst ourselves. I'm not sure if I wouldn't say it's rampant, but I see it a lot online. Like, people feel like, oh, well, you're working, you think you're superior to other people. I said, I don't feel that way at all. I want to just help you. If you choose to get a check the rest of your life, that I'm not judging you, but I think that's human nature, though. I don't know. It's a tough problem.
It is, and part of it also too is that people get discouraged if they are told no, that they can't do something. It's hard, to kind of pick yourself up from that and say, you know what, I'm not going to take no for an answer. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to pursue, and I'm going to pursue it. But you also need, part of being a good advocate is understand that you have rights, but you also have responsibilities. And until you're ready to, exhibit those responsibilities and work with, any kind of system, because regardless, it's not just an issue with the Commission for the Blind. Regardless of where you go, there's going to be certain things that you're going to have to do. You may not like doing them. I never liked getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning to get myself to work in time when I didn't have to be there until 9 a.m. But it's what I had to do. And so what I encourage people to do is, if you're not sure, if you have issues around some of these areas in terms of being able to really demonstrate and take the responsibility that you need to do, that's what you need to ask for help with. And that's how you can get from point A to point B. Some people, think that you just end up, at the Obama administration by osmosis, and you just happen to land there. When, in reality, it took a lot of steps. And I can share with you that when I was initially in my first year of college, for example, my very first semester, I said to my professor, ahead of time, I preached this to clients the whole time that I was, independent living case coordinator and a VR counselor. Don't just show up in a classroom at a college campus and expect that your professors are going to understand what your needs are.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Proactive. You need to talk to them before you ever go into that class. Well, I did all those things, but my professor forgot that I could not read if he was going to ask me to read out loud. And didn't he ask me to read out loud in front of a class full of my first-year freshman students? I was mortified. I didn't know how to handle it. So the way I handled it was I got up and I walked out of the class. And I said to a friend of mine, I'm not going back. And he said, what do you mean you're not going back? And I said, he asked me to read. I told him I can't read in a classroom. He asked me to read from the blackboard. I can't even see the blackboard. And I talked to him and told him that. And he said, so what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to quit. I'm not going back to school. That's it. I knew this was going to happen. I'm not going back. And he said, yes, you are. And I said, what do you mean? Yes, I am. And he said, yes, you are. You're going back in there. And then we're going to sit through this class. I'll sit beside you. And then at the end of the class, we're going to talk to this professor and remind him, what he did. And we're going to tell him, that you cannot read. And I was mortified. And so I did talk to him. And so I learned from that moment on, not only do you need to talk to the professor every time you have a new class or before you go into a class, I made sure that I had an appointment with them in person, and that I sent them emails, to as a reminder and let them know what I needed. And we had an agreement together then. And so if you don't take those kinds of steps, it was my responsibility too, to make sure that this professor understood what my limitations were. And I didn't do a good job at that. And then when it happened, I freaked out about it. So I think that
it's never easy in the beginning. I went through that. I learned the hard way. If I was a smart, dumb young kid, I would have been asked for a lot more help.
There's nothing wrong with asking for help. And you know what? Many other students, even when they don't have a disability, they're facing their own anxieties, things that are going on with them. And then I learned to partner with other students and to speak up and to let my needs, be known and ask for help. That is whether you're talking about a college classroom or you're talking about getting ready to go to your first internship experience, or, you want to get a job but you don't know what it is, don't just give up on it. Ask for that help. That's the only way you're going
Be proactive.
Yeah.
Be proactive. Okay, we have another caller on the line. I don't know who it is, but they're next on In Perspective. Who's the second caller? Chad. Yes, Chad from New York. You're on the line with Janet Labreck.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. My question, I didn't have any questions for Janet, but when Bob brought up something about getting a job and losing SSI benefits or something like that.
Yes.
Is Bob with me on that topic?
I brought that up, yes, because I feel that it's sad when somebody is offered a job or is able to land the job because of qualification and then says, well, I'm afraid to work because if I lose my benefits, I'm not going to have any insurance coverage. I'm not going to be able to make it, And as I said, and I know I'm at the risk of being repetitious, this is a major reason why I think the unemployment rate of the blind is still 75%, as it was 30, 40 years ago. That's one reason why. There are others, which I won't get into, but that's one of them for sure, Chad.
Okay, so that was one of my scares when I first started working, was that I go lose my SSI benefits.
See, your testimony.
Okay, but then also I was thinking about marriage. Do you lose your benefits when you get married, or?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on how much the spouse makes. If the spouse makes over a certain amount of money, the other spouse will lose SSI, and that's a subject for another day. Although we're talking about advocacy, so Jen, if you want to bring that up, feel free to do so. You know my thoughts on that subject.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that is a really tricky topic, and it's a very complex one because everything is so formula based with that particular issue when it comes to, marrying a person, with a disability, or even if you have another person you're marrying, and that person does not have a disability. SSI benefits are income-based programs, and so it's based on any kinds of income that are coming into the household. So, it's challenging because, you have this person you want to marry or you are married, but yet, there you have this now barrier that's been imposed on you in front of you. But again, when you think about, how do you navigate that, then individuals really have to think very hard and be very focused on the decision making in terms of this is the right time to get married, or do I want to get myself in a better position in terms of being employed? Yeah, it is extremely challenging. There is no easy answer to that because it's so individualized for each person, to be able to make that. It's a very personal decision. It's a decision I happen to not think we should have to make in terms of that, but it is that as long as it's an income-based program, it's a decision that anyone who is on or has ever been on has to make that decision.
Janet, I don't mind the fact that it's an income-based program. I get it. SSI is what it is. It's a subsidy, and that's a key word in this conversation, subsidy.
Right.
We all know what subsidy means. You're supplementing something. The point is, be that as it may, that it's an income-based program. I think the government sets the bar too low. I think if they raise the bar just a little bit and allow a little bit more income to be allowed to the couple while getting the subsidy, I think the couples would be able to live a little better. And I'm not suggesting that they live lavishly. That's not what I'm saying. But, I mean, the amount of money that the couples are allowed to make is very, very low. Very low. Can't do it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I do. I understand that, and it is a really difficult problem for people who are striving for economic self-sufficiency. And when do you let go of those benefits? What decisions do you need to take into consideration in terms of your own health care needs, as well, in terms of what's going to happen if you let go of the SSI benefits, for example, then you lose your mass health benefits, and that you may have. And so some of that now is very complicated by the fact that there are some programs that are put into place where you don't necessarily have to make that decision. And also there are some other savings programs like the ABLE Act, where individuals who are on either SSI.
Yes. Hello? Janet, are you still with us? Okay. Al, do you have any comments right now?
I think you lost
Al, are you there?
Sorry, Bob, I was on mute. Yes, I did have a question for Janet, kind of along the lines that you're talking about. Hopefully we can get her back. But my wonderment is whether...
Keep talking, Al. I'm going to get her back.
Okay,
Keep talking.
okay. My wonderment is whether or not the government at the federal or local site is actually trying to put into place more of an incremental kind of separation, if you will, or abatement of of money that's a little bit, like you said, Bob, more palatable. So, for instance, instead of for every dollar or whatever the formulary is, for every dollar that you start to earn, how about making it every $2, $3, or $4? For every $4 you earn over a period of such and such time, you only lose $1 of that benefit, with your health insurance being the very last benefit that one would lose. That to me would possibly encourage, and I know I'm simplifying things greatly here, more people to perhaps take risks and go out there and start closer to the bottom of something just to get employed, and then maybe have time to be able to move up within a company that they're working for, and earn a little bit more money over time until finally they're able to wean themselves off more seamlessly, less painlessly. I wonder if something like that is in process right now.
Okay. Al, can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay. Janet, you can answer that question.
Well, I think that there are a range of now programs where individuals should look into in terms of what is available to offset both expenses for going to work for individuals who are blind or visually impaired, but also programs like the Ticket to Work program, programs like the ABLE Act, which allows individuals to take a portion of the money that they're either currently earning as a result of working and put that aside in an account so that you can sort of save that money for different types of expenses like medical expenses or any kinds of insurance or any kinds of products that you may need, that are going to help to keep you independent at home. And there is still very much underutilization of the ABLE Act that does allow you to save those monies without being penalized for your SSI or SSDI benefits. So people should look into some of those opportunities that are going to help leverage the overpayment, from from Social Security that they've been dealing with as well. So people should look into that to see if there's possibilities there. But I also do know that when I was in the Obama administration, I was a part of meetings and groups where we were talking about different types of strategies that Social Security could certainly use to change how individuals who were living on Social Security benefits receive their benefits, and what some of the regulations currently were using for determining whether or not an individual could stay on SSI or not. And part of that conversation was also around both returning to work, but also helping to acquire these skills, for individuals to go to work as well. So I do know that they are working on, or at least were working on, different types of potential issues, around Social Security. I do know that also there were long-term studies that were coming to maturity in terms of looking at other potential solutions for Social Security, because, as you have probably heard, there's I guess, conflicting reports about how long the Social Security system would be sustainable in general in terms of whether or not more money needed to be put into the system as a whole.
Because of all the baby boomers retiring at the same time.
Exactly. 19,000 baby boomers every day turn age 65 in our country. So, and not only that, but also because we're aging into disability, 1 in 5 individuals in the United States is acquiring a disability. And so it is, and most of that is also because of the issue of people living longer and aging into disability. So it's taxing the system significantly because we are living longer, and because we're not only living longer with those conditions that we would have probably previously died from. There's now both technology interventions as well as medical interventions that are keeping us living longer and being able to live longer with those conditions.
So, Janet, we're solutions-based here, and one of the things that Bob and I try to do for our listeners is at the very end of our show, we try to come up with ways that our guests can think of to help folks, from your strength as a blindness and disability advocate. Give us, if you could, a simplified version. I think we probably have about maybe 5 minutes left at most, but give us a simplified version as much as possible, Janet, for our listeners who, especially, I'm concerned about the younger folks getting ready to transition out toward adulthood, maybe early adulthood already, who want to go to work, and they just feel like there are too many obstacles from a sort of general sense in terms of what you do with both of your companies, the vast experience you've had working directly with consumers and organizations. What kind of advice would you give to the young, fearful adult who wants to work but is just kind of afraid of many different obstacles, especially that might confront folks who are blind or disabled?
I think, first of all, start very young. I think that if you are a young adolescent, if you are in middle school, if you are in, getting ready to go into high school, that take an active role in what is being prepared for you to come into a classroom setting. Expectations, sometimes, the school systems may not necessarily, certainly collaborate in the way that they need to collaborate with the Commission for the Blind and other vocational rehabilitation agencies. Make sure that when you're